Woo! Okay, good afternoon, fellow teenagers. How are we doing? Oh, good? I got a very, very nice introduction from Adrian. Thank you very much. About how influential and how famous I am. Where are my slides? There we go. So we're going to talk about raising money, right? Capital. My experience is that, when I come to places like Moldova or neighboring countries, that everyone always says, we already have everything, we just need money, right? And I'm going to tell you guys that is a wrong perspective, partly wrong, some truth to it. So let's talk about getting funded, right? What's the whole point of going after investors? How do we do it? What kind of funding we need, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you're probably wondering, who am I to tell you this, right? What are my credentials? What is my background to be able to speak to you about this? Now, I quite accidentally founded my first company in 2008. The way it usually goes, it was me and my co-founder, who was one of my best friends from university. We were sharing an apartment in Amsterdam, both working as lawyers, and we had this feeling that we were paying too much rent. If you've ever lived in Western Europe or in Holland, our previous speaker actually also lives in the Netherlands, you know that rent can be expensive. And we, being lawyers and kind of smart, we found ways to lower that rent. And we significantly lowered our rent. We found a way to prove that our apartment was actually a social housing project, not a private one. So then our landlord actually had to pay us money back and he couldn't kick us out. So we did that, then a bunch of our friends started going after us, trying, to get us to do the same for them. Then we started getting parking permits without waiting, getting people parking permits in downtown Amsterdam. And before we knew it, we actually had this kind of a consultancy for simple legal services. And it kind of went out of control. We left our jobs. We hired a bunch of our friends, which was a very big mistake because, they kind of ran the company into the ground a few years after that, after we sold it though, so that was good. Raised some money in a time when, Amsterdam in 2008, 2009 was very much like Moldova is today. People were talking about startups a little bit. It wasn't as cool as it is. Like you had one conference like this one, the Next Web, but otherwise it was not a very popular thing to do. And there were no early stage investors, angels didn't really exist as a community. But we managed to do that. Then after that, the company got acquired. I left, went to Bulgaria to actually do a new startup, but instead of doing a new startup, I ended up setting up and running an accelerator, a 12 million euro venture fund with government EU money. Did a bunch of angel investments with a group of folks, did a lot of conferences. As you can see, that's Startup Adventure. And right now I actually do two things. One of them I'll be talking about at the very end, and I invite you to participate. One of them is called Traction Camp. Some of you here actually went to some of my events. We basically do a very short, compressed accelerator within a few days. This year we're going to be taking companies to Silicon Valley, to London, and getting them mentored on the spot. That's Traction Camp. And then I also run an angel group all across Eastern Europe, Middle East, where we look at deals and invest in them. So my goal here is to take away misconceptions about money, right? Because there are many of them. The biggest misconception, folks, is this one, right? And this is something that I see every single day, almost every day. When a company gets funded, it's like big news, right? And it shouldn't be. A lot of people take pride in closing venture capital, right? It's celebrated, it's fetishized, I would say, right? It's like this, there's this whole kind of popularity contest, like a Miss Universe contest about who gets funded, oh, look at those guys, they raised 2.5 million. Now they're losers because the other guys raised 2.6 million. And people, it probably looks cool for some people, but in reality you look like this guy, right? You just have a bunch of money, you're just showing it off, right? This is a very wrong thing to do. This is someone, unfortunately, from our industry who did the same thing. There was a startup, I think it still exists in Silicon Valley, it's called Klinkle. It was founded by this gentleman here who was 18 or 19 years old at the time. And he, after he closed his funding, he actually made that photo and put it on Instagram about how much money he raised, right? So that's really a really stupid thing to do, but unfortunately, a lot of people do that, right? And a lot of the tech press focuses a lot of attention on fundraising, right? And you don't want to do this because it usually doesn't lead to any good results. The real question is, do you need funding? And if you do, when do you need it and how do you need it, right? You probably all know the metaphor bootstrapping, right? Everyone knows what that means. Bootstrapping is pulling your own boots out of the mud, right? It's a term from the time when America was colonized. People were self-reliant, so they were, if you're stuck in the mud, you're actually pulling out your own boots out of the mud, self-help. And whether you raise money or you don't raise money at all, when you're building a company, you have to go through a stage when you're doing that, right? When you're actually getting to a point where you have some kind of results, we call it traction in our business, before you get any money in, right? So you have to be ready to do that, right? If you just do a startup for the sake of raising money, you're not an entrepreneur. You're just someone who is, trying to have a nice life at the expense of others. That's not the right way to do it. Now, for growth companies, at some point, it's unavoidable to raise money. And the question is, when do you raise it, how much do you raise it, and how do you do it? There are actually two very simple rules about venture capital. First of all, and by the way, when I say venture capital, I don't mean late stage venture capital or seed capital, I mean all of it, right? So any kind of money that goes into building ventures, whether it's a grant, whether it's equity funding, whether it's an accelerator that gives you some money, I call all of this venture capital because all of this is money to build ventures, right? Venture capital is passive. That's rule number one. If there is an opportunity, investors will find it, right? So all of these discussions, that in Moldova we don't have, enough venture capital, that means that in Moldova we don't have enough interesting companies, because if you would have investors coming here, flying here, investing here, local investors would start investing more. So your job is to actually create better startups. If you do that, the investors will always come. That's rule number one. Rule number two is that capital is a tool, right? It's not a product. It's not a service or a product. It's actually a tool for founders to use to get to a certain point, right? So if you don't know what you're doing with the capital, it doesn't really make any sense to get it. For startups, capital is all about network and expertise, right? So the right way to think about venture capital is that it's funding that comes with the opportunity to get into certain networks and to get certain skills that come from these investors, or that the investors help you unlock, to put them to good use in your company. That's the way to think about venture capital. For investors, it's a reward for helping, the returns that they can make is a reward for helping the companies out, right? So the way it works is that successful investors, they actually know things that founders don't know, and they give the founders money to use that expertise and use that network. Whether it's very early stage or it's very late stage, this is how venture capital works, right? So, which means that if you're a founder, you need to have a very good idea of the skills, network, and expertise that you need, and then you have to find investors accordingly. Might be an accelerator, might be a venture fund, might be an angel, but you need to understand that, right? Just the money is not really important. Just the money you can get from, it's much easier to make money with anything else than startups, right? It's the hardest thing is to make money with startups. So a couple of questions, right? When do you need VC? What kind of VC do you need? And then about getting it. I'll go very briefly because, we're over time already and I don't have that much time. When do you need venture capital? This is kind of the first question you ask yourself. There is a really, really good article written by a venture capitalist called Mark Suster, where he explains the theory of learning versus earning, and that is kind of the cornerstone thought when it comes to venture capital. If you haven't done startups before, if you haven't been part of a successful tech company, if you haven't been part of a successful startup, and this is your first try, and you're in an underdeveloped market like Moldova, then most probably you're learning, right? And if you're learning, the capital that you need is not the result-oriented capital, but the effort-oriented capital. Thank God we live in 2016, which means that early stage funding is pretty much commoditized. Wherever you go in Europe, wherever you point on that map, there is an accelerator, there is some kind of local venture fund, usually with government money or with corporate money. And if you're in the learning phase, it's really easy to get funded. I would say right now it's probably one of the easiest things to do. You just go to an accelerator, there are gazillions of them. I think the figure in Europe is something like 200 now. Almost every city, almost every country has one, right? If you don't have one in Chisinau yet, although I know there are plans to have them here, so probably at some point you guys will have accelerators here as well. If you don't have it yet, you can go across the border to Ukraine, to Romania, to any other country. There are accelerators, right? So if you just want to figure out how startups work, that's the best thing you can do. Get into an accelerator, learn something, choose a good one. There are many of them, and that's pretty much it. Now, if you're in the earning phase, that's where it gets interesting. Money, very much like all resources, has to be scarce, right? So everyone knows, I guess, the slide, about what is the difference between a product and a minimal viable product. The whole trick of building startups is that you have to do with very limited resources. Because if you have unlimited resources, you will end up doing things that you don't need to do, you shouldn't be doing, right? So just add money never works, right? It has to be measured and it has to be always a resource that is somewhat scarce. In reality, if we speak from the point of view of, building successful products, unless you have about 1,000 people that you've given, your product to try, you don't actually need funding. This is actually how simple it is. If you don't have money to develop it, you should do that as a side project. You should, try to get, use your savings. But until you have about 1,000 people that have tried it out, that have, showed interest, that have come back, you don't really need capital, right? You actually need capital in small portions after that, right? So it's all about experimenting in the beginning. Dave McClure, who's a pretty famous person out there on the internet and in real life, he said it very well, right? He said that people think that startup pitches are all about a storyline, like this happened, but in reality it's all about traction. Traction is the only thing that matters. I've seen, a lot of people tell me stories about their startups but never mention the traction. The traction is what gets investors interested, right? So if you have traction, that is what investors invest in. They obviously need to see a market, they need to see a team, but the traction is the key component of any investor conversation. People always ask, this is the question that I always get, is what is traction, right? How do you know how much traction you need? Just to give you kind of a figure to understand, investable traction is when you have about 20, if it's a billable business solution, business software, about 20 customers that pay regularly, right? You can say that is the first traction point that becomes interesting. If it's a consumer app, this is a company that I personally invested in and they did it pretty well, raised some money, went out to the markets. It's an app for measuring, for reading out the technical data from your car and tweaking it. About 100,000 downloads if it's a consumer app. If you can get to 100,000 downloads, treating it as a side project, as an experiment, that's when you can say you have traction. Basically anything before that, sure, you can get a little funding, but really it's not an investable, proper startup company yet. Once again, treat your project like an experiment. This is this is something that people in Silicon Valley understand extremely well, and my experience is that people in Europe and in many other places have a hard time understanding, right? People are very conservative about their idea. They like it very much. They're in love with their own idea and in love with their own product, and they don't treat it as an experiment. They have this kind of idea, this is how it's going to work. They don't really take any feedback, take any criticism, and don't treat it as an experiment. If you don't treat it as an experiment, it doesn't work, right? So most successful products, if not all, were created as a result of like 10, 15, 20, maybe 100 experiments. You build something, in this kind of very academic mindset. You build something, you see if it works. If it works, you continue. If it doesn't work, you do something else. And this is the way to go about it, right? So don't fall in love with your own idea, because that's what really kills startups at a very early stage. There's no traction, something is wrong, right? This is a nuclear-powered car. People in the 1950s thought that it's a very good idea because, nuclear reactors were becoming easier to build, smaller to build, and everyone thought that, well, nuclear power is almost unlimited, we'll be having nuclear-powered cars, right? And Ford, this is Ford over here, they actually started developing one, and then of course very quickly they find out that it's extremely dangerous, because if that car crashes, you have a little Chernobyl disaster, and if that happens every day, we'll screw up the earth very quickly. Interesting idea, they spent millions of dollars, developing it. It's an experiment, it didn't work out, right? So if there is no traction, if somehow people are not getting into it, something is wrong, right? You can do a couple of things, you can pour money, you can face the challenges, you should really be looking at it as an experiment. Now, once you have the traction, or once you have figured out that there is a need, right? 1,000 people like what you're doing, a couple of hundreds maybe installed it, a couple of people start paying for it, that's when it becomes interesting. And then you have to figure out what kind of venture capital you need. Now, what I'm going to do right now, guys, is I'm going to kind of give you an idea, and this is kind of a very insider view, because I've seen this happen maybe 20, 30 times in total, and it always follows the same pattern. The way non-Silicon Valley companies get funded in Silicon Valley, right? There's always a very simple process, and it's always the same process. People have something that someone likes, right? So there's a product that got downloaded. If it's a consumer product, it got downloaded 100,000 times. If it's a business product, what Ragnar was telling us this morning, first 5 people, then 10 people, then 100 people download it, use it, pay for it, right? You have something. And then you want to take that something and take it to the world, right? To show it to investors, show it, to large corporations that can become big customers. The way it always goes is that you need expertise in business developing it, marketing it, hiring the right product people. These are all the skills that are extremely scarce in communities like Moldova, like Ukraine, like anywhere in Europe. I would say outside London, even in London, those resources are super scarce, but outside London, in reality, you know, the amount of operators in Europe that can actually that know how to build companies, okay, in Germany you have some, but it's very, very limited, right? So what you do at that point is you take that product and you start showing it to people that you would like to employ. This is how it always goes, right? So you see someone who scaled a company in that domain from 10 users to 10 million users, someone who scaled, you know, sales from 10,000 a month to 1 million a month, and you basically go to those people and you tell them, listen, I want you to do this for my company. What do I need to do to get you to work for me? And this is what all successful founders do. They find the people that have that rare experience and skill that they don't have themselves and they will not be able to learn themselves. And you try to convince that person, and once that person tells you, okay, I'll join your company, but it'll cost you so and so much, because, you know, in Silicon Valley, for instance, experienced people get paid $100, $200, $300, $400, $500,000 a year, right? So there's no way a small startup can afford someone like that, right? These salaries, let's say in Germany, are a bit lower. In England, you know, they're a bit higher than in Germany, but generally those people are expensive. And once someone tells you, okay, I'll join you, but this is how much it's going to cost you, that's when you go to investors that understand that kind of skill, that have invested in these people or their companies before that, and then you tell them, okay, this is my dream team, please pay for it, right? In very short, this is how almost every fundraising goes. There are obviously nuances, you know, it doesn't always happen the same way, but generally, investors invest in CVs of operators or founders that actually have the proven experience of being able to execute a certain task, right? So understand your goals. I think I actually passed most of this. Find those right people, right? Think about it this way, guys. For every combination of technology and market, so let's say we're, you know, what kind of products did we see today? We saw Pipedrive. Pipedrive is CRM for sales, right? It's a web-based product for salespeople, right? That's a combination of, that's a vertical, right? So it's a technology and a specific use case. For every single combination of technology and specific use case, in the whole world, there are about, well, anywhere between 1 and maybe 100 people that really know how to sell that have done this before, that have been successful with that before. And your task is, once you figured out that something works, is to understand who those people are, right? And try to get those people into your business. And then once you did that, you find the investors that have that kind of experience, that have done this before. And this is how you actually successfully fundraise. To always, this is a kind of an insider trick that I can teach you guys. The way to do it is to always understand who is who, right? What I always do when I'm working on any kind of problem is I'm always trying to figure out, okay, who are the people who have done this before? You know, you start with looking at companies that have done similar things before. Then you look at the people that have worked at those companies, run those companies, invested in those companies. You start making a list, right? You can find all of that information online now. It's all on Crunchbase, on VentureBeat profiles. Once you have the names of the people, you can go on LinkedIn, see how many degrees of separation there are between you. You'll probably be surprised that you're very often second with very, very important and interesting people for your business. And then you start populating a table, and you know, that's how you kind of narrow down the people that might be able to invest or help out with your company. And then you get them to pay for your, basically get the investors to pay for that talent, as I already mentioned. Now, we talked about this already. Crunchbase, once again, an extremely good tool. And then what you have to do is to practice the pitch. Now, this is something that people in Eastern Europe are notoriously bad in. A good friend of mine always says that if someone, this was actually about Poland, I told you this joke before, that if you get a Polish pitch, that it's, the way startups pitch in Poland is, you know, as an investor, you stand here, and then the founder comes up to you slowly, doesn't look you in the eye, turns around you a couple of times, and then slowly walks away, right? This is how people very often pitch, right? Or for instance, what happened to me today, someone told me like, okay, let me show, do you have time? I'm going to show you my slides on my computer, like later on. Just tell me, right? You have to be able to deliver the essence. Mike Butcher talked about it this morning, right? Tell people that we're like this, but we're better, right? So you immediately give context. Don't start a big story. Don't start this whole long, you know, pitch, you know, this is what happened and this is what we do, and it's sort of this, but not really. That doesn't work. To start, and this is something that I always, you know, tell people to do in all the trainings that I do and all the founders that I work with, you have to be able to do a very simple 30-second pitch. There is a framework. It's called Startup Mad Libs. It was developed by the Founder Institute. And this is what they start their curricula with, right? They tell basically the founders to pitch according to this extremely simple, how do you call that, template. My company, name of your company, is developing a website, mobile application, a database, a piece of wood, whatever it is that you guys are building, to help a certain group of people, mothers with kids, people that need to do sales, people that are handicapped, people that want to travel, whatever, right? A target audience to solve that and that problem, right? Go somewhere, do something, sell something, do something, right? And then you can say maybe one or two things about the secret sauce. We're doing this faster or better or, you know, in a new way or whatever. Anything you do, any kind of work, whether it's a startup, whether it's your job, whether it's, you know, your hobby, whatever it is, you can always explain in that one very simple sentence, and this is something you should be able to do. Every time someone asks you, what are you doing? You give this one sentence pitch. And if you get to do that, you'll become very agile in pitching. And this is the first step to a good pitch. Then you basically learn to do a simple 2-minute pitch. And this is something, you know, they call it the elevator pitch because you're supposed to do this and, you know, to be able to do this within an elevator ride. This is something you should be able to do at any moment, any time, right? The goal of this very simple pitch, and this is something that I think, you know, with all these conferences that we're doing, with all these startup pitching events, we're sometimes giving off the wrong signal because sometimes it looks from the side as if it's like a beauty contest, right? Who creates a cooler pitch? Who does, you know, flashier slides? In reality, short pitches, 2-3 minute pitches, serve only one goal, right? It's getting a meeting with someone, right? So you pitch for a couple of minutes, and the only kind of takeaway that you want, or the only goal that you have, the only result that you're doing this for, is to get a meeting with that person, get the person interested, and then get them to tell you, okay, you know, I like this, come in for a meeting, tell me more. And then you go to a meeting, and then you have, well, in America it's usually 20 minutes, in Europe you usually get an hour, actually, where you can sit down with someone in their office and basically give them a detailed presentation of what is the problem, what is the solution, what is out there on the market, why we think it's not good enough, what we've done so far, who our team is, why we're doing this, and where we want to go. And very importantly, at the end, the ask, what do you need, right? Are you, you know, looking for a customer, looking for money, et cetera, et cetera. This is not something you want to cram into that 3-minute pitch, because in the 3-minute pitch, you only want to show very briefly what the potential is, why you're doing it, and that's it, right? So keep that in mind, that you pitch to get an opportunity to sit down with someone and tell them the whole story, right? And I find that a lot of people don't really get this well enough. And then have your documents ready. Now, what this means is that, and this is something that I also notice in Eastern Europe is a really big problem, people either don't understand or don't want to understand how investments are structured, right? So before you actually, when you get to a point when, you know, you're going to be offered an investment, you have to understand how it works legally. This whole stuff with percentages and equity and, you know, all that stuff, it's actually simple stuff if you've done it many times, but if you haven't, it's confusing, right? So try to understand that, right? If you want to get your company funded, go to 10 companies that were funded and ask them for how it worked, right? Ask them to show you their documents. Try to understand how it works. So the moment you get to a point when someone offers you a term sheet, as it's called, you actually know how it works. The reason I'm telling you this, for instance, it's a real story that happened to me, a company that I invested in with my first fund. They got at some point they were looking for an investor, they couldn't find one for a long time. At some point they get a term sheet from a pretty large German telecom corporation. Everyone knows which one that is. And that term sheet had a crazy clause in it which said that, you know, if we're going to give you the money, but we want the IP transferred to us. Right? So we want to own the IP of the company fully. And if you don't, if things don't work out, we'll keep the IP anyways, right? And that's what the term sheet said. That's generally a pretty bad deal, right? You're basically giving away the intellectual property to this corporation. You can choose to do that, but you have to be aware of that. What I remember very well was that these founders didn't even understand. When I even, showed them the clause and explained it to them, they were like, yeah, whatever. It's not whatever, right? This is one of the hardest things about getting, desperately wanting to find an investment, is that at some point you become so desperate that you're willing to accept any kind of abusive clause, right? So try to not make that mistake. Try to understand the terms and the structure of the investment before you actually get it. And then close, right? Be closing. Be in that closing mode. In American culture, this is something that is very, very present. In Europe, I guess everywhere in Europe, but especially in Eastern Europe, we have a big problem with it. We're all too nice to, we don't want to. I was talking, I think, to someone yesterday about this, also about Poland, I think, that people don't want to sell. People find it embarrassing, to sell. It's like, the culture that we grew up in. I was also born in the Soviet Union. Is that if you're selling something, that's like a very low level thing, right? If you're an intellectual person, you're doing science or arts, everything about literature. You're very well versed in politics and all that. But if you're selling something, oh my God, that's like, it's down there, a dirty salesman, a peddler, right? This is a mentality we need to get out of, right? Because life, business, success, think about, I think I have a slide on this actually somewhere. Think about it as getting a date, right? It's a very simple metaphor, right? If you're dating, especially if you're looking for the right kind of person in your life, you're always in that sales mode, right? You're always trying to get the person to, hang out with you, spend time with you, maybe like you, et cetera, right? So sales is the same thing, right? It's not dirty, it's not bad, it's just something you need to be doing. And any idea has to be defended in private and public, right? So if you have an idea, and startups are with the definition of a proposition, it's something that no one knows whether it's going to work, and it's your job to convince people, you're in perpetual sales mode, right? That's the way to think about it. Now, a couple of very simple takeaways before I finish. Number one, build relationships with people, right? This is also a graph from a post by Mark Suster. Basically, the way it goes is that any kind of contact, any kind of relationship is a matter of performance. So is it a good contact, is it a bad contact, and time. If you're meeting someone for the first time, it's highly unlikely that that person will buy from you or invest in you, right? But if you manage to get those meetings, one after the other, and the content of the contact, right? It sounds almost like poetry, becomes better. That's when you get to a point when you close. And experienced salespeople or people that are good in getting investments, they know how to play this game, right? So you meet someone, you had a good conversation, you follow up with an email, then a couple of days later you give them a call, then you go to another place where you can meet them again, and that's how you actually get to a close, right? This whole idea that, as a startup, you're getting on stage, you're pitching, and then people should, come with money to you, that's not how it works, right? The Silicon Valley hype machine really wants you to believe that's how it works, but I can believe, trust me, I've been to almost all of these demo days at Y Combinator, at 500 startups. It's all very nicely staged, and they try to, make you believe that once, you get on stage that investors will literally come there with checks that are going to be given out. In reality, there's a whole system behind it where people have met, have got an interest in each other, and by the time they actually close that investment, there's a whole history of, a line that goes up and to the right of the quality and the frequency of that contact, right? So that's a very important thing to remember. Build the network. Number two, understand, I talked so much about this already, understand how that network works. Best is, and this is what works very well in Silicon Valley, is that very often people that, very often you have a technical co-founder, and very often when it's an Eastern European company, that's with the original founder. But then, once they start getting business, getting sales, getting investors, they actually get a co-founder who has been in that industry for a while, right? So get someone, this is the best way to do it, get someone who has raised money before, built companies before, to be your co-founder, because it's so much easier. That person already has a network, knows how the system works, right? If you've been to an accelerator, use your credentials, right? So this is actually the best thing about accelerators, that they can actually give you kind of a proof of validation that you've already gone through a program. Use them wisely. If you guys are going to be applying to accelerators, what I would always do, and it doesn't matter whether it's an accelerator or an investment fund or any other kind of system that would give you money and would support you, try to get references, right? I see very often that people are super uncritical when it comes to especially accelerators, right? People just go like, oh, I can get 30,000 euros, or I can get some kind of program over there where I'll go to another country and live there for a while. But before you get to an accelerator, or before you actually before you accept an offer, right, from an accelerator, talk to at least 10 companies that have went through it, right? Be critical, ask them questions, what did they like, what didn't they like, right? So you don't get disappointed. So this is really something you want to do. Pipedrive, my favorite software, I love it. So I was very happy to see Ragnar talk here this morning again. I use Pipedrive for all the business stuff that I do. Set up your fundraising process as a sales process, right? So you guys all got the code today from Ragnar, right? It was, I think, Rockit 16 with a K, not with a CK. Go to Pipedrive, get an account, and if you guys are fundraising or selling, doesn't matter, use Pipedrive because it's really a really cool tool to use. So put in all the possible investors or accelerators or whatever it is that you're applying to, and then go through them as a sales process, right? You need to have that. Getting an investment is also sales, right? So that's the way to think about it. Oh my God, I said that already. It's like dating, right? So a relationship between a company and an investor is very much like a romantic relationship between two people, right? When you go out on a date, you don't go there and say like, okay, go to bed with me, right? That's not how it works, right? Or at least it has never worked for me, and I hope it has worked like that for any one of you, right? You have a whole process where you like someone, you take them out, you hang out together, you try to see whether your interests are more or less the same, then you try to see if you like the same food, the same stuff, and then slowly but surely, you start hanging out and it starts becoming romantic, or not, and you move to the next person. I haven't done this for almost a decade, so I almost don't remember how it was, but that's the way it should be, right? So in a process of getting an investor, it's actually, from a business point of view, it's as personal and as intimate as a love relationship. So keep that in mind, right? Treat it as such. This is a thought that a friend of mine, this is Samir Jain, he's a partner at Intel Capital, happen to know the guy. This is a thing he told me once in a meeting that I had with him. And it's a thought that struck very true to me. If you're outside a community where startups are happening, so let's say Silicon Valley, but it could also be London, it's actually, you have to be the same, but better, right? Because everyone else there plays the game on a certain level. If you want to play that game, you have to have the same level, but you actually have to be better because you're from outside. So it's harder for you by definition, right? So keep that in mind, right? It has become pretty popular nowadays to build startups, do startups, be in this whole tech community, but we got to be realistic, guys, that if we're going to be winning in this game, if you guys are going to be building companies that are successful, and they have to be successful on a global scale by definition, because Moldova or Romania or any other country here is too small. It's not a market, right? So whatever you guys are doing, it has to be significant enough on a global scale. If that is the case, you have to be able to play that game better, think about it, than people in Silicon Valley played, because you're not there, so it's harder for you, right? So this is it's something to keep you guys kind of, awake at night maybe sometimes, but this is the way to think about it. You have to be really, really good. If you're not good enough yet, get better, right? This is the way to think about it. And then when you're ready, raise as much as possible and be very cool. Now this is a photo, I don't remember his name anymore, but that guy raised, what was the name of that startup again? Color. I don't know if anyone remembers, about 5 years ago. Guy left, I think he left Apple. Yeah, he had a high position at Apple. And then he was pitching, because he was working at Apple in some kind of, cool job, he went to a bunch of investors and said, like, I'm going to make an app that, people who go to events together, like we are here today, or weddings, or whatever. Like everyone has their own photo album on Facebook, it doesn't really work. Why don't we create an app where anyone who is within a certain space makes photos, and then all those photos come together in one album, right? Nowadays there are tons of apps that do this, and they're all kind of, focused on events mostly. Back then it was like an explosion. Everyone was like, wow, that's such a great idea. Because the guy had a lot of exposure, he went to like famous people, famous journalists, bloggers. I remember Robert Scoble, running around showing that app to everyone in 2011. Raised $40 million. The app came out, no one actually used it. It was really badly designed because, you would have to like use it, but then you would never get, the reason to use it again if the albums weren't there. $40 million, nothing happened, right? They just blew $40 million down the drain, and at the end, when they still had a little bit left, there was a team of about 50 people, I think, working on it. They got acquired for $2 million by Facebook, and Facebook just, gave them jobs, basically, right? So raise 40 million, sell for 2 million. It's not a success, but it's an interesting experience, right? This is what happened to the guys. So if you can raise a lot and do a lot, but do know what you're doing. It's not for the faint of heart. Now, I'm almost done, but I wanted to give you guys a couple of freebies, or gifts actually, before I leave the stage. So freebie number one is that I do Traction Camp events, as I said already. This year we'll be taking startups to Silicon Valley, to London, to other places as well. In April and May, I'm going to be taking startups that are active in the agriculture technology field. So if you guys or your friends are doing stuff that is related to, like software for farms, software for food distribution, mobile apps for the agriculture business, drones, unmanned aerial vehicles, that's very much agriculture technology. Any of that stuff, let me know. If you're based in Moldova or Ukraine, unfortunately not Romania because it's EU, but if you're based in Moldova or Ukraine, we're going to be funding most of your costs, right? So if you're interested in that, go to tractioncamp.me, have a look. Later in the year, I'm going to be doing this for non-agtech startups. So by September, October, I'm going to be taking general startups to kind of these accelerator roadshow trips. So if you're interested to do more of this kind of stuff about investors, sales, and all that, let me know. It's almost free to participate, so think about it. Freebie number two, and this is like a really cool opportunity that I was negotiating for the last couple of weeks. There is a thing called the Global Entrepreneurship Summit. How many people know it? Have you heard about it? Yes, very good. It happened in Kenya last year, right? This year is going to be in Silicon Valley at the end of June. If you're based, again, in Moldova, in Ukraine, in Belarus, Serbia, Albania, and a bunch of other countries, which are not as represented here, if you actually apply for it, and you can apply until February 15th, so you still have like about a week to apply. If you do that, and you get accepted, so you go to the interview with the US Embassy, I will be able to fund your travel. And I can take a I can't take everyone in the room, but I can take a bunch of people. So go to GES2016.org, apply, and if you're accepted, my organization will probably be able to pay for you to come, right? Fully covered, flights and all that, so it's a really nice opportunity. If you want to use it, because I have to know who you are, obviously, for me to be able to support you, go on Twitter, tweet at me, right? This is, send this tweet, so I can have your name and everything, and then once you get accepted, you know, we will get in touch, right? So let's do this. And then finally, freebie number 3, I have a podcast which I started recently with a very good friend of mine. We talk about startups every week. If you want to get featured, we love talking about startups that we meet. So if you have a cool tool and you want to talk with me and my friend Yalem, who's a pretty experienced founder, he has a very cool company in Turkey, based in Istanbul. Every week we talk about startups in our podcast. We get more and more people listening to it. If you want to get featured, if you're interested in discussing your startup on air with me and Yalem, follow me on MaxCast, and we'll be, you know, just tweet at us again, and we'll invite you to our podcast. That's it, pretty much for me. Thank you guys very much. My name is Max. Thank you.